Hello, everyone. As I'm sure a lot of you are aware, JP Morgan right now is having some major controversy. And today I kind of want to go over what appears to have happened, kind of look at all of the information that's publicly available and give my own opinions and kind of break down where I think it's going, what's kind of happening, and then also discuss maybe some of the potential opinions coming out of public circles that I don't necessarily agree with. So without further ado, let's get into today's video. So to start off, the case is brought by Shairu Rana, and he's suing JP Morgan for an alleged, well, as he puts it, his boss made him a sex slave, and that boss being Lorna Hagini. Now, as we're going to discuss, there are some things that kind of raise some red flags in and of that statement itself, but that is mainly the basis of the claims here. And this really broke in the past couple of weeks to the public because this was something that was happening behind the scenes, but in essence, Rana initially went to JP Morgan and threatened to go public with his allegations, and he sought a settlement of above $20 million initially. Now, JP Morgan was not willing to go that far and really play ball with him, and this case kind of seemed in the court of public opinion to just be kind of a nuisance based thing. That was until about a few days ago, where the Wall Street Journal and the New York Times and New York Post, and at this point, every major media outlet discussed that JP Morgan had actually tried to potentially give him a settlement offer. And to a lot of people, they took this almost as an admission of guilt. Now, I'm going to talk in a little bit about why I don't necessarily view this as an admission of guilt from JP Morgan, but nevertheless, the claim was out, and suddenly people started, well, taking this case a bit more seriously. Now, one of the cornerstones of the actual allegations being brought is that JP Morgan kind of conducted their own investigation inside JP Morgan when Rana eventually went to the HR department with kind of his ideas of what was happening and his allegations. And some of them are definitely a bit out there, but nevertheless, JP Morgan conducted its own investigation and it found no evidence to back up any of the claims. However, this has of course been rebutted. It is worth noting that Rana during this investigation wasn't really cooperative with them, and then JP Morgan said on the flip side that Hagini was actually cooperating in the investigation. But Rana said that in this investigation they didn't go over all of the communication channels, and JP Morgan did actually identify some of the things that Rana had alleged, specifically more in terms of the racial harassment component of this, but there definitely was some things that they flagged, but they said that these were more focused around jokes that even Rana had participated in. However, that sounds out loud. That doesn't sound great to me, but nevertheless, they found that the brunt force of the terrible, awful claims that were being made, they couldn't find any proof for. But nevertheless, Rana initially filed under a John Doe before actually coming back and filing again, this time additionally with witness statements. So we're going to discuss some of those in a second. So one of the most interesting things I touched on earlier in the video related to actually him filing and alleging that it was basically his boss who was pressuring him into all of these things is that, well, the New York Post put out that they don't even report under the same departments, and she isn't his boss. Like, he doesn't report to her. So that definitely doesn't look good for the narrative. Now, there are definitely questions as to could this still happen, but or how could she get in the way and actually act on all of the alleged threats of getting in the way of promotions and potentially getting him fired and whatnot, and requiring and forcing all of these things outside of it. But I definitely think that's interesting to touch on. Now, as I discussed, people have really kind of latched onto this story after JP Morgan had come out and said that they had initially offered a $1 million settlement to Rana. And a lot of people took this, well, as an admission of guilt. Why would you pay, or why would you offer to pay $1 million unless there was definitely something going on here? And I just want to kind of take a step back because I don't necessarily view this specifically as an admission of guilt. And why do I say that? Well, in this instance, obviously a massive scandal like this, even if it came out that all of the allegations were fictitious or false, there's reputational damage to JP Morgan, yes, but additionally, a company like JP Morgan is going to be represented by incredible lawyers and great law firms. And it can be very, very, very surprisingly very costly to actually get enough evidence in the first place to properly defend themselves in a trial. And trials are known for being very expensive. So it's highly likely that JP Morgan was prepared to. Between the cost of actually hiring out their legal team, bringing together all of the evidence for their case, and additionally, any of the reputational damage to the firm, they valued that as significantly higher than $1 million. And so, therefore, they thought that they would go ahead and offer $1 million because it would be beneficial to them in the long run. Because even if all of the claims were false and they went through a trial process and everything, it could cost well over $1 million defending themselves. Now, what's kind of interesting is that typically this is where the story ends for a lot of these types of cases. They get a settlement offer, and typically it's very good on their end to end up taking it if there isn't enough evidence that the plaintiffs, in this case, Rana's case, would say, oh, we have this heaping load of evidence that we're about to hit you with. This is typically where that story ends. However, what's interesting to me and a lot of people is that he actually not only rejected this $1 million settlement offer, but then he came back with a counteroffer that was $11.75 million, which of course is over 11 times larger than the proposed settlement offer. Still less than the 20 million he was initially seeking, but to me this is definitely interesting and it raises thoughts. Now, obviously I have my own opinions going through what's publicly available as of right now as to where I'm kind of leaning in terms of the accuracy of all of the allegations versus the what seems to be the media push narrative that it's completely fictitious at this point. I feel pretty safe saying that's kind of the general public opinion is that the claims are outlandish and they seem to basically be picking sides at this point. And we'll definitely discuss why people are doing that. But at least to me, the fact that his counteroffer, well, the first thing is if he had absolutely zero evidence whatsoever, and his legal team had zero evidence whatsoever, it would be shocking for him to not only reject the settlement offer, but then push for something 11 times larger. Now, he definitely could. Like, sure, we might be trying to apply rational decision making to a situation that doesn't warrant rational decision making, but it definitely makes you ponder and think. And I think a lot of people have just kind of blown right past this. But to me, it definitely would raise questions that they obviously feel confident having something to pursue a trial if they not only said no to $1 million, which to pretty much everyone is a very large sum of money, they kind of downplayed it in some of the media articles by saying it was basically like a little bit over 2 years of this guy's salary. Because again, he's made his way up at JP Morgan on the leveraged finance team, so he has a very large salary. But still, even when you take out all of the legal fees and the lawyer fees from a settlement, that's still a lot of money for the vast majority of people on earth. And he was like, no, give me roughly 11 times that, please. So to me, that kind of raises some questions. Now, let's actually talk about some of the accusations because as and I think an insider put it best, somebody who actually kind of spoke to the Post, stayed anonymous, but they described it as a novel. And that sounds, I mean, obviously they were taking this from the stance of that it was fictitious and kind of the allegations weren't real, but just reading through some of the allegations, it's a lot to say the least. We have specifically the claims that he was drugged a lot of the times and date rape drugged and spiked with Viagra. We have the claims that a lot of people have been talking about the inter-office interaction where, without getting too graphic, it's a subject matter that's quite touchy, but he was come on to very, very strongly. And then he briefed months and months of allegations against abuse in this situation. So it's definitely like a very bad subject. And then I think some of the more interesting stuff additionally came out when he actually refiled with the witness statements that the witnesses saw this go down. The big story right now that a lot of people are admittedly poking fun at, but it's a witness who was on his couch who witnessed some of this go down and then was invited to participate. So obviously, like, if what is being alleged was 100% true, this is like heinous evil stuff, right? And that's a big if 100% of this was true, and there are a lot of character questions that come into play with Rana. Specifically, I think some of the interesting stuff being they've multiple media sites have kind of caught him up in prior lies. So specifically, there was the interesting one that the Post touched on, where allegedly in 2024, Rana had said his father had passed away, and then the Post was actually able to contact his father. So naturally, they're trying to do a lot of like character assassination on this, and I mean, it's not hard to do. I mean, that I just don't necessarily think that those things can be mutually exclusive. That he can have a poor character in some of the previous decisions, and you can definitely point that out, but that doesn't necessarily one to one translate to him making all of this up. So I'm just kind of cautious about jumping on one train or the other. Obviously, looking at this from a practical stance and reading through all of the available information, I'm left with the opinion that if components of the allegations are true, it would not be the entirety of it. That's just my general opinion reading through. And I think I worded that a lot nicer than most people have. The only reason I feel that it's not necessarily good to jump on one train or the other and say, no, this is what happened in the beginning of basically a massive legal thing is that we don't necessarily have all of the facts yet. And a lot of commentators on this issue that are very big name people are kind of staking on the fact that these claims are fictitious. And they're going about it by saying things that if if I personally were to say out loud, right? I'm just throwing this as an example. If I personally were to say these things out loud and then it was proven that, oh, like, just for instance, what if all of the claims were 100% true, and I had said even, like, 1/10 of some of the things that were publicly being said during this case and being joked about during this case, I would feel horrible. Like, that's to me, that's worth not trying to jump on one side of the train or the other until we have all the available information. Now, for me personally, in terms of what I'm seeing and guesstimating, I definitely think there is something to the stories, to the allegation. Whether or not that turns out to be that the entirety of them are fully accurate and fully represented is a completely different question. But I see actions like the rejection of the $1 million settlement coming in with a much larger offer, multiple times refiling, bringing in new witnesses. I see this as things that wouldn't necessarily happen because all of this is going to cost a significant amount of money to actually go through this trial. I see this as things that wouldn't practically, in any rational way, be conducted unless you weren't confident that you at least had something. And I don't think JP Morgan would go to the efforts it has if maybe there weren't some component of truth to this. Whether or not it's the laundry list of things that are being alleged is a completely different conversation, but it it definitely is interesting to see go down, and then we see different parts of the story get discredited and we see different parts get actually kind of proven a little bit in terms of like the racial discrimination, which is definitely taken a backseat to all of the other allegations at this point. But so far, it's looking like it's gonna be somewhere in between absolutely nothing happened and everything that's being alleged, which is typically how a lot of these cases end up going out. Like, that's pretty common to see it's gonna be in the middle, and that's not like a super hot take by any means. Now, one of the components of this story that I've seen Weirdly enough, political influencers who are also discussing like hot topics in this time, I've found it interesting to see that whole world blossom. If you guys kind of know what I'm talking about, but I've seen a lot of them point out some things that don't. I mean, they make sense from the standpoint of where they're coming. So one of the big claims that's kind of being pushed right now is like naturally just looking at the two of them, right? Rana is significantly more well built and stronger than his alleged attacker, right? A genie. And they're kind of missing the component of the story because they're saying, oh, well, obviously it wasn't like fully 100% not consensual because like he could shove her off or fight her or whatever physical altercation statement you want to throw out there, right? And I hear that, but at the same time that's only like a small portion of the piece. When you look at historical cases like this, it typically relies more on the power dynamic specifically of like your boss and you don't want to get fired and you're reliant on a paycheck and you even going through the case, right? If we take the allegations, there's that she was going to try and stunt his career growth. She was going to get in the way of promotion. She was going to like get him fired. There's all these like threats. And that's the other piece that a lot of people just kind of like overlook in this situation as to why it couldn't possibly happen, which again is weird because like I understand in terms of, oh, we see this the other way, like every single time a major case breaks, it's almost certainly it's the other way where it's a male CEO, male boss, or whatever who is doing heinous things. But that doesn't necessarily mean that it couldn't happen in reverse. And it's a little bit weird too, before we have all of the facts and evidence in even a decision, kind of see all of the jokes and the memes and the people who will just like go on the internet and say like things banking on the fact that it is fully fictitious, and if not, I hope they're kind of held accountable for some of the things they've said because they're really bad. I'm just gonna throw it out that way. Like there have been statements uttered that even like if this were fictitious, you probably wouldn't want to say out loud. So yeah. Hey everyone, I just wanted to thank you for checking out my video. I really appreciate your time. I hope you found it entertaining at least, or maybe a little bit about learning kind of the situation that's going on. Overall, I definitely think this is a good lesson to like not jump to conclusions by any means one way or the other. And I'm not just talking about this story in particular. I mean, definitely when you look at the narratives pushed and everything, it looks like it's going to lean one way versus the other. Like this one seems like a good time where it's going to definitely be one person was more representative of the truth than the other's claims. But this is a good time in general to really think about not trying to jump to conclusions, not just taking sides based on, well, very small amounts of public information. And overall, I hope you guys have a great day, and thank you very much for checking out my video.